Fairytales.
Hello and welcome everybody to another episode of SEO Fairytales. With me today is Mike King, founder and CEO of IPullRank, where you help bigger brands to be more successful in Google search results and other search engines probably as well. And you are objectively the best rapper. At least that's what it says on your website. Is that?
I mean, if it's on the internet, it's true, obviously.
Obviously, absolutely. Everything on the internet is true. I think that's the takeaway for the episode.
Mm-hmm.
But before we make that our takeaway, you brought me a little story from the trenches, so to speak. What happened there?
So I was in a room with probably like 20 people at one of my clients. They're like one of the car comparison sites.
Mm-hmm.
And their C-level executive, like the sponsor for the SEO program, was like, hey, Mike, we're seeing a big spike in 404s. And this guy is awesome. He's always been super supportive of everything that we're doing. And he was like, I'm not sure why that is. Can we figure that out?
It might not even be a problem. Who knows?
Right.
If they just deleted a bunch of stuff, then
yeah. So I'm on the spot at this point. And I'm like, okay, let's figure this out. And you know, first they're showing the screenshot of GSC, and it's like, okay, huge spike in soft 404s. And I'm like, all right, well, let's see what's going on.
Right. You see that in the coverage report in Google Search Console, right?
Mm-hmm.
GSC. Yeah. All right.
Yep. And so first thing I did is I looked at Botify because, you know, I love the platform in that it allows you to combine crawl data with log file data. So we get a sense of how Googlebot is actually crawling. And so I looked to rule out some of the obvious things because, you know, typically client is like, hey, was it an algorithm update? Very rarely is it an algorithm update. And so we're looking through trying to see if there's any like rendering issues going on because that was my first instinct.
True. If it's like a soft 404, then it might just be rendering. So was it rendering to be blamed?
Technically, we'll get there.
Ooh,
so,
okay.
All right. So we looked through all the crawl data. We looked at the log files and there was no spikes in log file activity, which I typically see if it was an algorithm update.
Right.
And so, you know, from there, I was just looking through like, okay, was there any changes to the pages? Because you can do the comparison. And
client always says no when you ask that. Like,
Exactly.
did you change anything? I didn't touch it. It was like that when I found it.
Exactly. Yeah. And so having a tool like Botify, you can do the actual diffs and so on. So nothing there. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, let's look to see if there were any like environmental conditions,
right? Because
it may not have actually been this soft 404 issue. Maybe search volume changed around those queries.
Fair.
And looked at that, nothing there. At some point, someone in the room was saying like, hey, you know, Googlebot can crawl from different locations. And I was like, that's true. Let's just take another look at the logs. And I noticed at one point, the IPs changed.
Oh.
So what we ended up doing is we did some like reverse lookups and things like that just to see like, okay,
did
the location change?
Ah, right.
And it did. So suddenly you guys were crawling from Traverse City, Michigan. And first of all, I didn't know where that was. And so we looked at the site itself, put in Traverse City, and this was specifically on their inventory pages. So once you put in Traverse City, there's no inventory. So to you guys, it was a soft 404 because there's nothing on those pages. And so, you know, because we even looked at the fetch and render. I mean, I don't know that's what you call it anymore.
URL inspection tool.
Yes, in GSC, no problems because they're crawling from presumably Mountain View or whatever it is. And so we were like, okay, well, again, no rendering issues here. What's going on? But once we looked at the site from Traverse City, then we saw there was nothing on the page.
Oh, so it's like a regional content situation where we just came from somewhere where you don't have content, and that's why. Okay.
Right.
So it was like a geographical issue that when we crawled from, where was it? Somewhere.
Traverse City, Michigan.
Traverse City. I've never heard that. Okay, maybe we have a data center there. Who knows? Apparently we have a data center there. I don't know. You didn't have any inventory for that. So how did you fix that though?
So what we did is we just default to national, like showing national inventory. And we were very mindful that it could be considered cloaking. So we don't do it just for Google Bot, we do it for all users.
For everyone, yeah.
And, you know, I personally don't believe you guys care about cloaking that much anymore because there's so many reasons for different content to show up for different contexts. But a client is going to be super scared of that. So we're like, all right, boom, let's make sure we show that to all users.
It's interesting that you say that. We do care about cloaking, but cloaking has a very specific definition. It's when you mislead the user. So as long as you're like, we don't exactly know where you are, so we're just going to show you the national content, or we don't have inventory for your location, so we're just going to show you national content on our homepage. I think that's fine. That if I come to a car comparison website, I see car comparisons. So not really cloaking. What I would be worried about is if I come to a car comparison website, and now I see ads for drugs.
Sure.
That is not great. And then that is considered cloaking. We do care about that, but not really like.
Yeah, and it's actually quite rare for me to see that in the wild anymore. But a lot of people take that definition very literally.
I know.
And so a client is like, ooh, is that cloaking? We can't do that. And I'm like, it's a better user experience.
Exactly.
Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Generally, like the user experience should be good and consistent with user expectations. And as long as it's that. We had that case with a news site where they're like, oh, you're not seeing anything from us and it's because of geolocation. So they basically just load the local news. And when you don't have geolocation available, then they just show nothing, which you have to admit is a bad user experience.
Absolutely.
If I am like, no, you don't get my location, and then I see a blank page, not great, right? So, and they're like, oh, but isn't it cloaking? I'm like, no, you're not doing something specifically for Google. You're doing it for users who choose not to give you the location. That's not cloaking. So, but I see where you're going with this. And it's interesting that is continuously a problem where people are like, is this cloaking? Because our documentation, as far as I know, says that it's about misleading the user if you cloak. So you could argue that maybe misleading the user is a bit vague, and we should, if we're open for suggestions. If you have better suggestions, let us know. We're happy to take them. Feedback is always appreciated. So to recap, they came to you with a rise in 404s, but
soft 404s.
Well, soft 404 specifically, but they didn't change the site.
Right.
And they were like, it's an algorithm update. And you're like, no.
They said, is it an algorithm update? They weren't sure.
Okay, so they weren't sure, and you're like, no, it's not.
I mean, that's almost always my answer. Like, my default is like, it's not an algorithm update. Or client is like, well, I heard there was an algorithm update. What has changed for everybody? I'm like, I can't tell you that the day after one is announced. Like, because the reality is, you guys are a software company. I would imagine when things are rolled out, there may be components that get rolled back in that 2-week window.
And it doesn't roll out one or nothing. Like it's in between somewhere for a while.
And so people just assume, like, they read an article like, oh, these are all the things that changed. There's an algorithm update yesterday. And I'm just like, okay, well, what happens if they change it back? You know, so I typically refuse to answer those questions, at least until there's like 2 to 3 weeks that have passed and you guys have like kind of settled into what it's going to be. And then we do our reviews. I don't know, I have a lot of issues with how algorithm updates are handled by our community, because I feel like a lot of it is like, okay, well, let's look at one of these tools that measures visibility. And we saw visibility drop for all these sites. All these sites have commonalities. Here's what must have been the problem. And that's not necessarily true.
No.
And you're also not comparing what those pages look like before and after.
That's true.
Like, there could have been things that they changed.
Exactly.
So that's why it's so difficult for me to like engage in that.
Yeah, I don't engage in that because the web is such a living, breathing organism. And I also find the discussions of all other things being equal, ...
Right.
Very, very tricky because
They're
they
not.
never are, right? Because all things being equal means you copied a website, and that has its very own problems. So yeah, that's a fun one. And I like that you said that you use the log file analysis, because I haven't heard that being mentioned very often previously. I know that a few people are doing it and leveraging it, but I don't feel like it's talked about enough, because I think it's such a useful tool.
It is, but it's so difficult to get that data. You know,
Yeah,
it's like you have to find some person that lives in a back room in DevOps somewhere who's like, which logs do you need? It's like, quite obviously, I need the access logs, guys. Come on, like, but nevertheless, you know, just getting them is difficult. And then if you're not using a tool like Botify or Screaming Frog Log File Analyzer, or there's numerous tools out there, a lot of people don't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
Or like, if you don't know how to like parse them yourself, then you're kind of like, okay, big text files. What I do?
Yeah.
So I think that's the difficulty. It's just kind of like that lack of understanding and also access to them. But I find them incredibly valuable, especially for sites that are like millions of pages, because understanding what Google is crawling and what it's not, and where they're seeing issues that, you know, you're not seeing in crawl tools, it's one of the most valuable things that you can get.
And it's so interesting that that is so undervalued, or so still perceived, or still is hard for SEOs to get into, because I know that in the developer community, logging has been an ongoing discussion for a long time, and like there's solutions such as the Elk stack, and then Elasticsearch does a lot of logging things, Splunk, Graylog. There's like so many different things that are basically sort of settling down to be the standard solutions for logging.
Sure.
Log4j being an abstraction layer above all of that from the code perspective. Why don't more people work together to get the most out of the logs? Because we collect all this data about what happens on our systems, as any company does. Like you have all these logs, and not that many people are actually actively looking into them. And if it's for like outage monitoring or something, but you can drag so much more out of it, including performance metrics sometimes.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, the thing is, like, I've been using the internet in some form since like 92. And so all those types of things are just native to me, like using the command line, native to me. So I'm like, before we had JavaScript driven analytics was log files.
Exactly.
So, you know, it's really easy for me to look at those and know what they mean, but not every SEO has that experience.
Has that background, yeah. I wonder if do you know any resources for people who want to learn more about that?
I know the Built Visible guys have a resource on that. I'm pretty sure the Onely guys have one. We should write one. But yeah, those are good places to start. Also, like the Kibana tutorials will tell you a lot about it too.
True, yeah, Kibanas. Yeah, completely forgot about that one. But yeah, that exists as well. Sweet. Awesome. Thank you so much. That was an interesting ride into geo-specific content and software force, and kind of rendering, but not really rendering.
Right.
So that was fun. I think we're gonna link all the resources for the log file analysis that you mentioned in the description below.
Cool.
And I would love to hear from you all if you use some sort of log file analysis, and if so, what? And if not, why not? And why is it hard for you to get into that? All right. Thank you so much for being here with me today, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
And for all of you out there, stay safe, take care, and bye-bye.